Hello there. As you can see, I am wearing something I would roughly call a Hawaiian shirt, so now you know you are watching an intellectual. Anyhow, this topic came out when discussing the Altus crank. You know, the link to the review I was supposed to put in the description, but I already forgot. And by the way, the crank continues to be great. Anyhow, the point of contention were the irreplaceable chain rings, because by the nature of that thing, once those rings were out, the crank is gone, you toss it into the trash, and it seems rather wasteful, at least on the surface, because you are throwing away the entire crankset. So, is that really true? Well, let's discuss. If you've taken at least a cursory glance at physics, you'll notice that there are quite a few conservation rules. This gets conserved, that gets conserved, everything gets conserved, and the crown jewel, the cherry on the top of the entire shebang, is the law of conservation of energy, which states, in layman's terms, that whatever was before, after a process which we are taking a look at has been completed and all the accounting of the process has been done, must be after. So you get a product and you get some sort of a waste. However, there is also a corollary to the law of conservation of energy, which is a second law of thermodynamics, which, of course, this is one of the most abused laws in the world. Watch, in layman's terms, the second law of thermodynamics tells you that what you had before, after a process completes, is less useful after the process. And this obviously includes the product, because, listen to this, a product of the process, the one we are actually wanting to get, is less useful than the raw materials, because the product can only be used, only to the thing it was designed for. However, raw materials can be turned into a variety of products. Think about it in this manner. Before this crankset was produced, it was a sheet of steel, a bar of aluminum, some electricity, some fuel, and some other things, like other resources like human involvement and design. Let's just not think about those. Let's just not overcomplicate the issue. Anyhow, the raw materials can be turned into a variety of things. However, once this exists, you can only do whatever you can do with a crankset, and what you have of the rest of those things are some steel chips, some aluminum chips, some heat, some electricity wasted, and your contribution to climate change in some sort of an exhaust. Obviously, this is a product, and the rest of those things is a waste. And if you do all the accounting, this plus all the waste, once you track it back, is going to end up with raw materials. So the second law of thermodynamics tells you that you're going to end up with a product and some chips and waste. However, the law of conservation of energy tells you that both of those things, before and after manufacture, are essentially equal. But you can raise an objection that raw materials are energy. Well, are they not really? Well, let's just not talk about cosmology, so energy equals mass c squared, not this level of abstraction. Are raw materials energy? Well, of course they are, because in order to get them, you need to spend energy. You need to spend energy to prospect, you need to spend energy to build a mine, you need to spend energy to mine the raw material, you need to spend energy to process it, and so on and so on. Once you regress on just about every economical activity, it always boils down to the one very simple fact. The only input to economy is energy. In essence, we had to burn something, and the excess of the heat in its condensed form was transferred in some ways to get stuff done. And of course, the entire process of production boils down once again to two things: energy as input and product, something like this, as output, and a lesser form of energy, because second law of thermodynamics, fumes, chips, coolants, tools, people, everything, essentially as waste. Of course, it's difficult to use such a basic term as energy in everyday life, even if only because we didn't know the term 20,000 years ago and we had to make trade somehow. So in our never-ending cunning, we emergently arrived at a term we are using to abstract away energy from our everyday life, and that term is value. Value, however, in and of itself is also quite difficult to work with, because it doesn't really matter that you know that, for example, a cart of coal is worth whatever it is worth, is its value of something, because you're not going to be carrying a cart of coal whenever you want to trade. However, we are very smart. Well, you can see the civilization around us. We are quite smart, actually. However, the point being is that we have came up with an expression of value, or expression of units of value, and we call that expression money. In essence, money is an expression of value. Value is an abstraction of energy. Therefore, money is also an abstraction of energy. Amount of money you're paying for something, or you're exchanging for something, is the amount of energy that has been moved in the economy, either by you or by someone else. Money is essentially a representative of energy that is in circulation in a given economy. Alright, so money was spent, some waste was created. So there's also another question here. Obviously, not all products are created the same. Now you can kind of expect that the price you paid just tells you how hard it really was to create a given product. However, even though you have the more expensive product in your hand, you have another issue to contend to, which is efficiency. Essentially, okay, you just paid 200 values for a product, and there's another that costs 50 values, and they're doing the same thing. However, how much product are you really getting? Alright, let's do some exampling. This is a Shimano Altus chain set I have reviewed some time ago. It has 46 by 30 chainrings, very massive and very steel. This is an E13 triple. I have converted to a double. It has 44 by 30 chainrings, and it's essentially completely made out of aluminum. Which one of these two is going to serve me for a longer period of time? Well, obviously, the E13 is a much nicer product. It has been optimized for weight. It is much more advanced. However, when it comes to raw service life, you can't beat the Altus. With my rough estimations, for each worn out 46 ring on an Altus, I'm going to be needing to replace or to wear out 3 44 chain rings of the E13. I couldn't find the price for an E13 chainring, but if we estimate that it would cost the same as an XT chainring, it would cost approximately $360 for a single service life of the Altus when using these, and when spread along the very long time, it comes out that the Altus is approximately 5 times cheaper to run than the E13. And since it's 5 times cheaper to run, if we take into account how economy works, the all value being energy, energy being money and whatnot, it also means that Altus is going to generate 5 times less waste. Now, I'm certain that at this point some of you will tell me that the price of the product isn't really dependent on how hard it was to make it, and obviously in the microcosm of the product itself, that's true. After all, I'm certain that the E13 crankset here wasn't really 10 times more expensive to make than the Altus. However, it obviously sets the lower limit. After all, you can't subsidize something into infinity. At some point you need to stop, and if it still requires more energy than it costs, the economical activity has to cease. However, what about the upper limit? Well, now this is true that the Chinese can churn out narrow white chainrings at $5 a piece, and the wolf tooth chainring will put you back like $50, even if it cost $5 to make. But that $45 in profit isn't going to sit on wolf tooth's bank account forever. After all, workers need to be compensated, machinery needs to be paid for or bought if you want to, expand your production. R&D needs to be paid for, which is quite expensive and Chinese don't do it. And even the executives, well, they are going to spend their fat bonuses on, luxurious cars, escorts, entertainment, chemistry and whatnot. And as you can imagine, getting that dope through the Mexican border is quite cumbersome process, which is quite energy expensive, so obviously their street price reflects that. Globally speaking, however, as long as economy exists, money is an expression of value. Value is an abstraction of energy. Value, just like energy, cannot be destroyed. It's simply the product or anything created with money is going to change form to a less useful one, as second law of thermodynamics suggests. Essentially, every product at some point is going to end up on a trash heap. Money can wither away with inflation, although not really. Inflation is just the government taxing you for your economical inactivity. Anyhow, it can wither away with inflation, it can be frozen on some billionaire's bank account, or can even stop existing entirely once humans stop existing. However, as long as we do stuff, as long as economy exists, amount of money spent, which is essentially amount of energy changing place or changing hands, means that along with the money, along with the flow of value from one place to another, waste is produced, products are produced, and they continuously change form to a less useful one. And the process is proportional. If you spend $100, you have just pushed the process by $100. If you spend 1,000, you have made a contribution that is 10 times higher, regardless of amount of products you actually purchase. To put it really bluntly, you can spend all your annual earnings on a box of matches, burn them away, and be happy that you have saved the planet. However, the guy you have bought the matches from, well, you can't stop him, or her, or it, from blowing away all your money on trinkets and doodads. Alright, so what's the MacGuffin here? How does all of that relate to cranksets? You see, the feature I'm supposed to look for at high-end crankset is that it has replaceable chainrings. And obviously, once you wear down the chainring, you just replace it with something else, and you recycle the chainring. And obviously, once this dies, it dies, and you are throwing it into the trash bin. However, considering that what I just told you, that the amount of money spent is directly proportional to the amount of waste that's going to be created at some point, because that's how economy works, that's just how value flows through the economy, it doesn't really hold water, because a single replacement chainring for an E13 costs approximately $60, and complete Altus crankset costs $35. So for each chainring for the E13 I'm going to buy 2 cranksets, almost 2 Altuses, and I'm going to have, as you already noted, 3 times more usage time out of it. Now, if manufacturers played nicely, then the interface for mounting the replaceable chainrings would be common, and the chainrings would be pretty cheap. However, it's not quite so, because as you already know, the replacement for an E13, the 44 tooth chainrings, cost about $60, which would buy me 2 Altus cranksets. And $60 is going to push the economy for $60 worth of waste. The $35 Altus is going to serve me 3 times more, so I will actually need to spend $180 to get the same usage out of the E13 than of a single Altus chain set. So there is $180 worth of economical activity, thus waste, for each $35 Altus chain set. That's not really ecological, now is it? The ecological argument for getting an expensive crankset with a replaceable chainrings kind of makes sense when it comes to the slow creep of a single ring drivetrains, because once you have the plethora of cheap Chinese rings, you can always buy the expensive crankset and then slap a $5 chainring there, and you can customize yourself with a size, because they are available in just about every size imaginable. You can customize your colors, you can buy them in ovals, you can buy them in different offsets. However, what I'm getting at is that the main feature of replaceable chainrings isn't really the ecology or the environmental friendliness of the entire shebang. However, it is the ability to customize your gearing. And the problem is that customizing your gearing when it comes to multi-ring setups, for technical reasons, is kind of a hassle. In short, you need to have all the rings matched when it comes to the arrangement of the shifting ramps, And it's not quite as easy as you might think, because obviously the manufacturers are doing everything to make chain rings of different kind of group tiers or group levels to be incompatible with each other. So what to do when you really want to save those snails and whales? Well, we already know that the amount of money spent is essentially the amount of money put into the economy, and considering how the economy works, it's more or less dependent on how much waste you're going to generate. Obviously, your annual income is somewhat capped, so the efficiency of the product, or essentially how much product you're going to be getting for the money you spend, is only going to tell you how much consumption you can really do. Because obviously, if you spend $360 on Altus cranksets, you have the ability to use them 30 times more than a single 10 times more, sorry. 10 times more than an E13 and 2 replacement chain rings, and that's essentially the more or less price equivalence between them. And we can argue that you can't write 10 times more. I digress. Point being, the amount of money you spend is the amount of money you're pushing through the economy, and considering the economy as a whole, it's essentially how much waste is going to be created either by you or someone else who you've given the money to. This, however, has two interesting corollaries. First of all, if you're a vegan or environmental type and you're buying the expensive vegan, environmentally friendly organic food and whatnots, if you're paying twice the money, you're creating twice the waste, because you are dealing with an economy of everyone. You spent twice the money, you created twice the waste, obviously. And the second thing, if you're buying the cheap stuff in order to save on amount of trash you are generating, and that cheap stuff is very efficient, like this crankset here, because we can imagine that if those $35 but would be breaking apart in 2 minutes, and would be terrible. It would be less efficient than the E13. And that's the entire premise of the Altus crankset, is that it's more efficient than E13. You're getting for the dollars paid, you get more product, you get more service life. Point being, if you're going to be buying the cheap stuff, you are going to be creating less trash in the microcosm of the stuff you just bought, but you're going to be left with an excess income. And what you're going to do with it? You're going to spend it. There is something called the Jevons paradox, or Jevons paradox. It was first formed in the good old times of 1865, and in its very basic form, it really means that the more efficient we are at using a resource, the more of that resource we are going to be using. And, well, not the other way around, as you would expect. And this is really the crux of the issue we are going to be discussing, because if you're going to be buying cheap and efficient stuff, like the Altus crank here, or plethora of other products, you are going to be left with an excess income you are going to be able to spend, and you're going to spend it. And obviously, because you are very efficient, the products you are buying are very efficient, you're going to be spending them on lots of products. You're going to be performing massive amount of consumption. The amount of waste or the amount of environmental impact you have created is going to be capped by the amount of money you actually spent. However, if you're going to be buying expensive stuff and living like some sort of an ascetic monk somewhere, you're going to be buying the expensive stuff, which is not very efficient in the product sense of ways. Well, you are lowering the amount of consumption you are doing. However, you are granting someone else the right to spend the excess, which would create with the efficient products in the cheap stuff. You are going to be granting someone else the right to spend the excess any way they wish. Your economical activity, or you granting the right to be economically active to someone else, means that globally speaking, the amount of economical activity, money changing hands, went up. And thus, as an effect, the amount of waste and pollution went up as well. Of course, if everyone made the effort and reduced their consumption, then we wouldn't be having this problem, because we would be making very little pollution and we would be consuming very little. However, this is like asking an alcoholic to stop drinking. It's simply not going to happen. Moreover, well, this isn't really a solution, because regardless of how you're going to look at it, the services, the products, and everything we make, this progress, it's simply enhancing this brief period of existence we've been given. So I don't think that reducing our consumption is really the solution, because reducing the consumption is really reducing our quality of life. What we as a civilization need to do is to finally learn that our trash is not to be allowed to heap up. In essence, from the conception, through production, through extraction of raw materials, through every part of a life cycle, a product or a waste, a product created, and a product which has ended its life cycle need to be reprocessed into new products. Only in such an arrangement we are going to avoid this unhealthy situation when we are trying to progress to more, better, faster, everything, but we're going to be buried under a heap of old, not really useful and broken waste, fluids and everything else. In essence, the climate change, the depletion of ozone layer, the plastics in Pacific is everything which, as I just told you, is a result of us not reprocessing our waste or allowing our waste like CO2 to simply seep into the atmosphere and gone. But that of course is a pretty grandiose and far-reaching and most likely out of scope of you as a person. So what can you do in order not to be an, well, environmental hazard? It will suffice that whatever you buy is going to be trivially recyclable and that you are recycling whatever you stopped using. Let me show you something. This is an Altus crank. And this is a box it came with. This box is entirely made out of carton and some blue paint. Nothing else is in here, and I kept it precisely to show you this in this video. This box is trivially recyclable. There's nothing here that is some glue, some staplers or anything. You just throw it into paper, bin, and done. No trace of it ever is going to leave the environment, or you're going to be wiping your rear with it at some point, like in 20 years or whatever. This, however, is just aluminum, steel, steel, aluminum. Not as trivially recyclable as this box, but it's still pretty easy to recycle. Because once it wears out, you can simply break it apart, throw it into a bin, done. No issue there. It's going to live as something else at some point. This thing is even easier to recycle because it's entirely made out of aluminum, maybe without these bolts here. So once it wears out, you just disassemble this, throw it into a bin, done. The amount of money you paid, well, you can't really control the production process or anything like that, but oh, by the way, chips in factories are usually scrapped as well because they are quite heavy. They're producing tons of chips when making bicycle parts. What I'm getting at is, however, bicycle parts are for the most part trivially recyclable. They are made of just one or two materials and you can disassemble them and you're done. However, the exception for this is, I think, carbon fiber, because it is just this composite material of aramid fibers, Kevlar maybe, some resins and whatnot, and they are not as easily recyclable, which by the way is one of the reasons why I don't own any carbon things. Okay, so I guess this is everything I have to say about the subject, because I'm fairly sure that if I said any more you would be falling to sleep. Although I heard from a reputable source that when it comes to ad revenue, the only thing that matters is watch time. So if you're listening to this, thank you, because your watch time means that I'm going to be making lots of money. I'm going to spend on, well, cheap Chinese bicycle parts, because that's the business model of this channel. Anyhow, this is everything I have to say about the subject. I think I'm competent enough to say my opinions here, because, well, this is the internet. And besides, since I am the one that does the talking, you can be almost certain that everything I say is literally scripture. Anyhow, I hope this was entertaining, or at least thought-provoking. I hope to see you on the next video. If you watched all the way to the end, well, thank you once again, and I hope to see you on the next one.